This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. News that Dr. Christine Blasey Ford will testify Thursday about her sexual assault allegation against President Trump's Supreme Court nominee, Judge Brett Kavanaugh, has prompted many to warn senators not to repeat the same mistakes made during the confirmation process of Justice Clarence Thomas back in 1991, when Anita Hill was questioned by an all-male, all-white Senate Judiciary Committee about her allegations that Thomas sexually harassed her when he was her supervisor. This is Republican Senator Hal Heflin questioning Anita Hill back in 1991.
Now, in trying to determine whether you are telling falsehoods or not, I've got to determine what your motivation might be. Are you a scorned woman?
Former Vice President Joe Biden has been sharply criticized for his role in questioning Anita Hill as chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee back in 1991.
You tell the committee what was the most embarrassing of all the incidences that you have alleged?
I think the one that was the most embarrassing was his discussion of pornography involving these women with large breasts and engaged in a variety of sex with different people or animals. That was the thing that embarrassed me the most and made me feel the most humiliated.
So that was then Senator Biden questioning Anita Hill. She was also questioned by the late Senator Arlen Specter.
You testified this morning in response to Senator Biden that the most embarrassing question involved, this is not too bad, women's large breasts. That's a word we use all the time. That was the most embarrassing aspect of what Judge Thomas had said to you.
No, the most embarrassing aspect was his description of the acts of these individuals, these women.
In the weeks after that hearing, Black feminists organized a manifesto titled African American Women in Defense of Ourselves that was signed by nearly 1,600 women who raised $50,000 to publish it as an ad in the New York Times. It read in part, "We're particularly outraged by the racist and sexist treatment of Professor Anita Hill, an African American woman who is maligned and castigated for daring to speak publicly of her own experience of sexual abuse. The malicious defamation of Professor Hill insulted all women of African descent and sent a dangerous message to any woman who might contemplate a sexual harassment complaint." That was 1991. Now, Anita Hill has issued a statement on the sexual allegations against Brett Kavanaugh, writing, quote, "Given the seriousness of these allegations, the government needs to find a fair and neutral way for complaints to be investigated. I have seen firsthand what happens when such a process is weaponized." In a moment, we're going to go to Chicago, where we're joined by Barbara Ransby, who was one of the initiators of African American Women in Defense of Ourselves in 1991. She's now a professor of African American Studies, Gender and Women's Studies and History at the University of Illinois, Chicago, author of the award-winning biography, Ella Baker and the Black Freedom Movement, and now a new book just out titled Making All Black Lives Matter, Reimagining Freedom in the 21st century. We are joined by Professor Ransby now. If you can take us back to 1991, as we just heard Alexis Goldstein talking about organizing 1,100 women at Dr. Christine Blasey Ford's alma mater in high school, what you did back with Anita Hill and why you did it.
So in 1991, we, myself, Elsa Barkley Brown, and Deborah King, organized an ad campaign, and it was really in response to what you've already described as what we felt was the outrageous treatment of Dr. Hill before the Senate Judiciary Committee. We wanted to say we believed her. We also wanted to put her statement in a larger context of sexism and racism that Black women experience. And we did this, before the internet. So we got letters. We had an 800 phone line. We really reached far and wide. And I think many people were watching the spectacle of those hearings and were outraged by it, and we wanted to give voice to that rage. We wanted to insert our voices as Black feminists into a public discourse, and so we wanted to put the ad in the New York Times. We put it in several African American newspapers as well, and then an organization called AWEDU, African American Women in Defense of Ourselves, grew out of that and lasted for several years, engaged in various work around gender justice. I see a lot of similarities, with this case. There's some obvious differences. Christine Blasey Ford is alleging an actual sexual assault. Anita Hill was alleging, and we believe her. I believe Christine Blasey Ford. But the difference between harassment and sexual assault is a significant one. The racial and class backgrounds of the accuser and the accused is different, and of course it's 27 years later. So all those things are part of my reaction to this, but despite Me Too, despite all of the heroic work of so many women organizers for so many years, patriarchy and misogyny are still very much alive and well, and we see it playing out in how these stories are being retold, but also in how the Republican senators are behaving with skepticism and concern more about optics than substance.
People may not realize it was the Senate Judiciary Committee in 1991 that was led by Senator Joe Biden. It was a Democratic majority Senate Judiciary Committee. That the Republicans don't want to repeat the optics of Dr. Christine Blasey Ford pushing very hard to be questioned by the senators. All the current Republican senators on the Senate Judiciary Committee are white men. There are 4 Democratic women on the Senate Judiciary Committee, and of course it's Republican. But if you could talk about what Anita Hill was up against, they want a woman lawyer today to be the questioner of Dr. Ford, representing the Republicans.
Right. I mean, I think this is, as I said before, I think it's more a concern with the optics, which in the case of Anita Hill, was so powerful to have this panel of white men looking down upon her, asking her, intrusive, embarrassing, presumptuous questions, questioning if she was in her right mind later. I mean, a whole number of things. The woman, "Are you a woman scorned?" was probably the ultimate low point. But I also wanted to comment.
Hal Heflin.
Hal Heflin. But Joe Biden, I think, has expressed some regret about how he handled the hearing. There were other witnesses who were standing ready to corroborate Anita Hill's allegations who were not allowed to testify, and I think that's something to consider as we're considering this case as well. Yeah, I mean, optics are a concern. I want to say, that it's outrageous what happened, what women are alleging happened 35 years ago at Georgetown Prep and more recently at Yale in terms of Kavanaugh. But what's also outrageous is the feigned disbelief of these senators. I don't think for 1 minute that they find it implausible that these kinds of things happen. They are so pervasive. 1 in 6 women experience some form of sexual assault. And so, I think, trying to create a scenario where they are not hovering above this woman, appearing to be interrogating her, I think that is a political move. It's an opportunistic move. They're concerned with the theatrics of this. But I also think, in their heart of hearts, they are as familiar as all of us are with these kinds of instances of sexual assault and sexual harassment, particularly privileged men being insulated from the consequences of their actions. So the outrage, the feigned disbelief, I think is also a part of the theatrics.
And very interestingly, Professor Ransby, you have several of the senators who were involved with questioning Anita Hill in 1991 who are on the committee today, namely Senator Grassley, also Senator Patrick Leahy of Vermont, who asked Anita Hill what she had to gain by testifying against Clarence Thomas.
Right. Yeah, 27 years later, and I think it's 3 of them are still there. And some
Orrin
of the same
Hatch as well, who is saying no matter what happens, he believes Kavanaugh.
Yeah, I know, and what an outrageous thing to say. But also, you know, the same kinds of questions are being asked. Why did she wait? You know, why didn't she report it right away? I mean, anyone remotely familiar with the pattern of sexual assault know how hard it is for women to come forward, for survivors to come forward. Many people simply swallow the pain. Many women are fearful of the consequences of coming forward. And if the senators were even slightly familiar with the literature on this, they would certainly know that. But that is an echo of 1991 as well.
You know, Dr. Christine Blasey Ford has made very clear she wants the FBI to investigate, like what the I stands for in FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Right. Anita Hill did have an FBI investigation, got one. It lasted for 3 days.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I'm not a big fan of the FBI, but in this case, certainly, I think an FBI investigation is warranted. There was an FBI investigation with Anita Hill. I think Anita Hill made a very strong, persuasive, and credible argument and told a story that was very compelling in terms of what happened to her vis-a-vis Clarence Thomas. You know, we believed her, and you know, I think you know, we've been borne out. But the other thing I want to say is that, you know, in this atmosphere of Donald Trump, I think that's another significant change when you have someone who is an admitted sexual predator in the White House. The Republican senators can tolerate Trump. They certainly are prepared to defend and tolerate the kinds of actions that Brett Kavanaugh
Well, this is part one of our discussion. Barbara Ransby has a new book out. It's called Making All Black Lives Matter. Barbara Ransby is a professor of women's studies and history at University of Illinois, Chicago. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks for joining.